I think a lot of folks assume that religion is for religious people, that religion is a private matter, and that religions are inflexible. The fact is, though, that religion is just an area of study, and its phenomena affects us all, whether or not we're religious. Religions are made up of people. So if people are inflexible, then sometimes flexible, then so too are religions. So I've got three images on this slide. The first in the center is the Pope at the Vatican on Easter Sunday. It's a completely empty scene in St. Peter's Square. And when the Pope stood there and gave his blessings for Easter Sunday, one of the things that he said was that he's not just blessing the square and the non-existent people there, but rather the whole world. In the top right is an image of a Passover Seder just a few weeks ago, a Jewish holiday that's also in the spring. And for many religious Jews, using technology is a big question mark in a religious ceremony. And yet for Seder, since you're supposed to gather with friends and leave your door open and welcome strangers, this idea of a home Zoom Seder, or a Zeder, as the internet was calling them, became really popular. And on the bottom right, you see a picture of Mecca, the Kaaba in particular. All the way back in February, the Saudi Arabian government canceled any pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, the holiest sites for Muslims, and they are now considering canceling the Hajj, which is the major season in which most Muslims would go on pilgrimage. And so that image of the Kaaba with no one around it, as a scholar of Islam, is so startling to me. Because regardless of the time of year, that is usually one of the most busy places in the world, and certainly at a time when Muslims are gearing up for the holy month of Ramadan. To see empty places like this drives home the fact that folks are really having to make changes about their expectations around religious practice and religious communities, institutions, and individuals, and they're all either abiding by those choices or, as we'll see in a minute, not abiding by those choices. So what these images show us, I think, is that there's religious innovation happening across the board. There is a particular and particularly American religious response that we're seeing as well. And really, in the past weeks or so, it's been something that I found impossible to ignore in my various news feeds, whether that's online or TV or the radio, around folks participating in Open the Economy protests, making arguments around the fact that churches being closed is a threat and a violation of religious freedom or the First Amendment. We've seen governors suggest that churches in some places are essential and ought not to be closed at all. We've also seen anti-Muslim rhetoric around the unfairness of churches being closed, and with Ramadan coming up, wanting to see whether or not, quote, Muslims would be held to the same standard, unquote. And using the upcoming Muslim Holy Month as an excuse to sort of demonstrate a certain ideology wherein Christians are a beleaguered minority in the US. And I want to say loudly and for the record that that is absolutely factually inaccurate. And blaming Muslims for spreading COVID-19 is hate speech. It is hate speech. There's a long history in this country, and particularly of white Christian Protestant strains, with a particularly extreme view of science. And we're seeing that play out in real time. And I want to highlight that because I think that when we think of things like religion is inflexible, or we're seeing things like religious fundamentalists go protest, and we think things like, how come these people are so crazy? How come these religious people aren't listening? The truth is that that is a real minority within a minority. And there's a racial politic, a Christian supremacy politic, and an American politic happening all at once here. We're not seeing the same kinds of reactions in other places in the world. And even places that demographically look similar to us, like the UK or Australia, we're not seeing these kinds of responses. I want to name for the record that these are a particular kind of religion and a particular kind of American religion and a particular kind of Christianity that's having this anti-scientific, our religion is more important than the public health here. And I think naming that helps us see how religious people across the world are making more choices that look like innovation, changes to practices that account for science and account for the public health rather than don't. Just because that's a loud minority doesn't mean that they're a majority by any stretch of the imagination. When we're talking about religious change, these are defined by things we saw before, like the Pope preaching to an empty square, or the empty Kaaba and Mecca, and Zoom Seders. But one of the ways that this affects all of us are the sort of grim realities of a pandemic that has, to date, claimed over 100,000 lives in the US. We have cemeteries, burial rituals, crematoriums, death certificates, all of these things that in the US are inextricable from religious institutions. How we mourn the victims of this pandemic has a lot of religious resonance for people. What kinds of processes of grief and grieving are available when you can't hug your sister or your mother or your child? And I'm not trying to end on a really dire note, but I do want us to think about where religion might pop up for us in our individual lives, even if we ourselves are not already thinking about how to manage an iftar during Ramadan while we're in social isolation.